Hey folks, this is just a video to have a quick word on the In Amenas hostage crisis in Algeria, and some of my thoughts on that situation. Firstly, it would appear this is certainly one of the most high profile, one of the largest scale hostage crises in recent years anywhere. In case you don't know, basically what happened is Islamists, thought to be Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda linked Islamists, took over the Tagan gas facility near In Amenas in Algeria a few days ago. This is a large facility with over 700 workers, mostly Algerians, but there's also 107 foreigners. Details are still emerging, they're still quite complex, but reports indicate that the Algerian military decided to storm the facility, and during that process, reports suggest that, let me just get this right, and as I say, this is not an absolute concrete thing, but reports suggest 23 hostages were killed, along with 32 militants. And many more have been either escaped or been rescued. Numerous countries are involved because their nationals are among either the dead or those who were held hostage. That includes Colombia, France, Japan, Malaysia, Norway, the Philippines, Romania, the UK and the US. So a number of countries are involved in this. Okay, first of all, my heart goes out to the families of those who have been killed. I can't imagine the sort of emotional strain they must be under right now. It must be an enormous relief for those who have been freed or escaped. But my heart goes out to the families of those who have perished in this terrorist attack. The mastermind behind the attack is said to be Mukhtar Mukhtar, who's quite a powerful Islamist figure. I understand, and as I say, this is a developing situation. The group responsible is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which has been active in the Maghreb, or that part of northwest Africa, for about 10 years now. And already people are linking this closely with the Malian war. A few days ago I made a video on the Malian situation and why I support French intervention. I'd just like to make it clear, I absolutely stand by everything I made in that video, and this hostage crisis does not change my stance on that. Already people are lining up to say, oh well, look what happened. The French intervened in Mali and look what's happened. We've provoked the Islamists to attack this gas facility. Now there's I divide this into two groups of people. On one hand, those who are Islamists, who are sympathetic to Islamists and saying it's deserved. I did get one reply to my video saying your soldiers will come back in body bags, clearly from an Islamist. Well, first of all, our soldiers aren't on the ground, so sorry to disappoint you. I forget the guy's name, but they're not on the ground. But secondly, this is a very sort of defeatist attitude. Those who aren't Islamists or aren't necessarily sympathetic to the Islamists, but who are saying, oh well, we shouldn't interfere because this is what happens. I think frankly that's quite an ignorant, cowardly attitude to have. This idea that we should just let them have what they want, we should just let them do as they please, and therefore, oh well, that way they're not going to, take hostages and so on. Now my understanding is this group, their demands were that hundreds of Islamist prisoners were released by Algeria. The Algerians have taken a pretty heavy response, storming the compound, and they received quite a lot of criticism for that, but significantly President Hollande has defended that decision and said he thinks Algerians made the right decision to storm the compound. There's another significant byproduct of all of this. A week ago, France and Algeria were not on the same level in terms of the Mali intervention. Now it appears they're on the same page. That's very significant. I think it's an odious claim to suggest that had France stayed out in Mali, this wouldn't have happened. or it would have happened anyway. And I'm sure this operation would have been planned long in advance. An operation on that scale does not happen spontaneously. So I'm sure this happened before the Mali intervention. And you know what? Even if it happened afterwards, even if it was planned afterwards, that's insignificant. Because that does not justify this brutal terrorist attack. I'm just getting a little bit sick of people who, every time something like this happens, the first people they blame is the West or the victims of these terrorist attacks. Their attitude is pretty much, don't offend the Islamists, let them have their way and these things won't happen. That's a very, very naive view, because there's been many examples of terrorist attacks occurring against countries that have had no military involvement in situations. It's an odious claim to suggest that Islamists only target Western governments, or only target those who are perceived to be the Crusaders. When they attacked the UN in Iraq, and the UN compound in Baghdad, that was an attack on the international community. These people are ruthless, cold-blooded terrorists. And it's a particular brand of terrorism which you cannot, I believe, negotiate with. Islamists are not interested in money. They're not interested in land. Their campaign is deeply ideological, theocratic. They see the world in a black and white way. They aren't like the FARC or the IRA or other terrorist organizations, which don't have religious theocracy as their guiding ideology. That's the difference with Islamism. And that's why I believe, although the war on terror has many, many flaws, the actual principle of taking on Islamist terror is a pragmatic one. Now, there can be many arguments about some of the approaches that have been taken, but I am absolutely sick and tired of left-wingers suggesting that the best approach is just to let them do what they want. In other words, those people are suggesting that we should just let Islamist groups take over Mali. And if you don't want the humane approach for the Malian people, i.e. the fact that these Islamist groups would enslave Malian women, okay, if you want to be selfish, say, that's none of our business, let them do it. There's bigger issues at stake, which is wherever Islamists take over, that's a stronghold for Islamist ideology. And wherever they get a stronghold is one more likelihood, one more chance that they can continue their spread of the Ummah. This isn't naive, this isn't paranoia. Now some people might say, oh, you're comparing this to the domino effect in the Cold War, like if one country goes communist another will, but this is a lot more dangerous than communism. We're talking about religious fundamentalism, and this will be a very, very long war. I'm talking about the wider war on terrorism, and I'm aware that's a controversial term, and I know the Obama administration doesn't use it, but leaving Iraq aside, I don't think that the notion that if we just stay out of Islamic countries then everything will be fine, I think that's an incredibly naive notion. Islamism did not begin with 9/11. Islamism existed long before that. And Islamism did not begin with the invasion of Iraq. It began long before that. Let's not pretend that Western policy somehow justifies Islamic extremism. And that's not to say Western policy can't be criticised. And I am not a blind nationalist. I am not suggesting for a second that there are no Western policies that are counterproductive, that are immoral, and that can be criticised, because they absolutely can. But having said that, I believe there are situations that are absolutely justified. Now, President Hollande has taken a preemptive position on the Malian crisis. I believe he's taken the right decision. And there's been an absolute emphasis on African nations being involved. So this is not a colonialist adventure. And I'm just fed up of the likes of the Stop the War Coalition and RT propaganda and other sources which are fiercely anti-Western, basically distorting the situation for their own agenda. This is a very complex situation, and the idea that Western policy results in Islamic extremism is a simplification of reality. Now, it's true that, for example, drone strikes in Pakistan and the counterproductive invasion of Iraq and other situations will feed into Islamist propaganda. I accept that. But I think it's absolutely odious to ever try to justify Islamic terror by somehow claiming Western policy is responsible for it. And these Islamist hypocrites, they're almost laughable when they claim they are standing up for civilian casualties, because wherever Islamists have a threshold, they impose severe Sharia law. They don't hesitate to execute people for the most trivial of so-called crimes. They have a savage ideology, and I don't care if it's politically incorrect saying that. They have a savage, medieval, barbaric ideology, and it must be fought. I'm not talking about Islam, and as anyone who thinks this is a war on Islam, I would point out that the vast majority of victims of Islamist terror groups have been Muslims. I am so sick and tired of groups like the Stop the War Coalition distorting this, and I believe they are openly apologistic for these terrorist organisations. And I base that not because they oppose Western policy, but for the fact that they actually refuse to condemn Islamist attacks. Now, how else can you interpret that except for being an apologia for Islamist terror? So basically, I think President Hollande took the right move in Mali. No one's saying the situation is simple, but I believe it would have been a lot worse if Ansar Dine was simply allowed to take over the country. Now, I don't know what Ansar Dine's links are with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. I wouldn't be surprised if they have close ties, because they have similar goals. But basically, this is a major hostage situation. It's the biggest for a long time, and there's absolutely no justification for it. And those people who are basically loving the opportunity to say, I told you so, and oh look, you intervened in Mali, therefore this is justified, those people are somewhat sadistic because they're justifying terrorism, but they're also very naive because Islamist terror will exist with or without Western intervention. That's a fact. Look at Nigeria. There's no Western intervention in Nigeria, yet you still see severe Islamist violence in the north of the country with Boko Haram. There's no Western troops in Nigeria, yet that situation is occurring there. There's no Western troops in Indonesia. There's been Islamist insurgencies there. There's no Western troops in the Philippines. Well, okay, I might be wrong there. There may be American troops. But the point is, it's simply an odious distortion to claim that Islamist violence only occurs where there's Western intervention. In fact, one of the main criticisms of the West is that the West has ignored these situations developing, and I believe President Hollande has taken a bold and important move in Mali. And I would urge the French authorities to do everything they can to avoid civilian fatalities. But the difference between those sort of airstrikes and Islamists is Islamists deliberately target civilians. That is an indisputable fact. And really that's all I have to say on the situation. I'm sick and tired of people making apologies for Islamist terror, especially since most of the victims of Islamist terror are actually Muslims. And if I were a reasonable Muslim, I would have as much reason to despise these people as anybody else. That's all I really have to say. I mean, it's tragic that there has been fatalities in this case. In a hostage situation, it's very difficult to know what the right approach is. The Algerian authorities could have held back and just seen what happened, but when it comes to Islamic ideology, money is not the issue. I know there was demands about freeing prisoners, but hostage situations are never black and white. And it's very hard to know whether this was the right approach. It's tragic that there has been fatalities, but it's hard to see with the number of hostages involved that there wouldn't have been fatalities. basically, to conclude this video, I'm not a blind nationalist. I believe there are times that Western policy has been both immoral and counterproductive. But this idea that it's universally wrong and universally foolish is simply stupid, and it also amounts, I believe, to appeasing Islamist terrorism, which can't be negotiated with.